It was supposed to be quick, a show of strength, a calculated strike followed by terms of surrender and carefully staged negotiations. But wars never listened to plans. This one started at the rim, with a dispute over mining rights and shipping lanes. Then came the accusations, the blockades, the retaliatory strikes. And before anyone knew it, the entire galaxy was watching two great powers unravel themselves. The war became everything. It wasn't about borders anymore, or resources, or honor. It was survival now. Systems switched sides. Alliances fell apart. Civilian worlds were pulled into the fire whether they wanted to be or not. Every day more ships left their docks and didn't return. Every week a new planet was scorched, shelled, or lost. The front lines were no longer lines at all. They were smears, wide zones of space where no law held, no diplomacy mattered. Just steel, fire, and silence. And in that silence, whispers began to return. Not of new weapons, not of reinforcements, but of a name, one not spoken in briefings or reports, but in bunkers and trenches, in refugee shelters, in fading emergency broadcasts cut off mid-sentence. The Revenant. No one knew where the word had come from. Some said it was a ship, others said it was a program, an old Terran failsafe built for wars like this, when all else had failed. The most desperate claimed to have seen it. A shadow on the edge of the battlefield. No signal, no ID, just a shape that arrived, and then left the wreckage behind. There were no records, no flight logs, just stories. The Council denied everything. There is no Revenant. It's propaganda, a rumor, a distraction from strategic realities. But soldiers kept telling the tale. A ship, ancient and unregistered, bigger than anything in the current fleet, moved like gravity didn't apply to it. Weapons that didn't flash, just ended things. The galaxy had always lived with its ghosts, ruins on dead planets, ships lost in dark space, stories carved into the walls of forgotten outposts. But this ghost was different. This ghost fought back, and so while the war dragged on, while treaties collapsed and the casualty counts turned into simple daily figures on news feeds, the legend grew, not out of hope, out of need, because every soldier who ran out of ammo, every captain who saw their requests for support ignored, every colony that watched their skies darken without a single friendly ship in orbit, they needed something. Even if it was just a name. The Revenant, the ship that came when no one else did. But legends don't fight battles. Myths don't stop invasions, and stories, no matter how powerful, don't hold off siege fleets. Not for long. The war kept going, and the galaxy bled. But somewhere out in the black, beyond the front lines, beyond the political borders and deep within a system no longer mapped, a sensor flickered, a signal activated, not from the Council, not from the fleets, not from any official channel, just a cry, just a call, and something heard it. Lorne's Reach was never meant to be a battlefield. It was a mining colony, barely self-sustaining. A frozen world tucked along a corridor of old trade routes, forgotten by politics and diplomacy alike. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't strategic. But it was in the way. When the war spilled past the core systems and started creeping along the rim, Lorne's Reach found itself trapped between two advancing fronts. Neither side claimed it. Neither offered protection, but both saw it as territory to control. And so, the fighting came. First in the sky, orbital strikes that knocked out their satellites and burned half a mountain range. Then on the ground, drop pods falling like meteors, scattering enemy forces across the snow-covered plains, breaching supply domes and smashing through the colony's walls. There was no army on Lorne's Reach, only workers, technicians, old veterans who hadn't held a weapon in 20 years. And so, they held the line with what they had, repurposed mining lasers, shielded cargo haulers turned into makeshift bunkers, short-range drones set to detonate on proximity. It wasn't war. It was survival, and they were losing. The last functional transmitter sat inside a half-collapsed relay station built into a canyon wall. The roof leaked. Power flickered. Radiation from a destroyed fusion tower made the air buzz. Inside, the colony's acting commander, Jaron Hollow, age 62, former logistics officer, sat beside a blinking screen, staring at one final option. They had already sent the distress signals to the Council, to nearby fleets, to systems marked as neutral. Nothing. 1. Reply came from a trade authority, offering extraction for a price they couldn't pay. Another from a neighboring system, marked as unable to assist. Status: engaged. Jaron didn't scream, didn't curse, he just lowered his head, and for a long time he said nothing. Then one of the younger techs, barely 20, whispered the word, Revenant. A joke, at first, the kind you make when you're 2 steps from losing everything, but no one laughed. Because what else was left? Jaron looked at the ancient backup panel still wired into the terminal. It held codes no one used anymore, a patchwork of old Terran relay chains once meant for emergencies only. He opened the channel, typed the message. Colony Lorne's Reach, civilian population under siege, no military support remaining. He hesitated, then typed the last line. To any unit operating under Legacy Earth Protocol, if you still exist, please. And then, almost as an afterthought, Revenant. He hit send. The screen blinked once, then went dark. The station shuddered. Outside, the mountains echoed, with the sound of falling debris. The snow had begun to melt, not from spring but from orbital heat weapons tearing into the frozen crust. Down below, in the lower shelter levels, the colony braced for breach. Some huddled in silence. Some held family. Some simply stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to collapse. They didn't believe help was coming. Not anymore. The message wasn't a strategy. It was a farewell. A breath into the void. A name spoken one last time. Not in hope, but in memory. And far beyond the colony, beyond the range of Council sensors, beyond even the most distant warship, something caught it. A signature buried in forgotten code. A call routed through dying satellites and rusted jump relays. And somewhere, in a place no fleet had charted in decades, a signal blinked and something began to wake. The signal from Lorne's Reach didn't go far. Not through official networks. Not through sanctioned convoys or Council-controlled jump gates. Those were quiet, dark, disconnected. No one in authority had answered the call. But deep in the black, beyond, charted space, beyond shipping lanes, beyond the edge of war and peace alike, there was a forgotten place. No planets, no sun, no reason for anyone to pass through. Just a debris field, cold and still, orbiting the remains of a shattered moon, and hidden among that wreckage, something listened. Not a person, not a fleet. A ship, sleeping, waiting. Built so long ago that its metal bore the scars of wars no one taught in military academies anymore. Its systems were offline. Its name wasn't in any modern registry. It didn't answer to flags or codes or orders, but it had ears, old ones, deep ones, and when it heard the signal from Lorne's Reach, it didn't ask questions. It recognized the protocol, the tone, the desperation, and most importantly, the name. Revenant. A word most ships wouldn't even process. A word erased from fleet archives, a ghost word, but to this ship, it was a command, a trigger, a memory. Lights flickered on, not fast, not bright. Just a slow, creeping illumination, like something waking from the bottom of a deep ocean trench. Reactor cores surged with life. Primary systems scanned themselves, rebooting one by one. Weapon systems initialized, armor plating groaned. Inside, its massive hull, the ship's intelligence came online. Not artificial, not emotional, but focused. Purpose-built. Its last standing command was simple. Stand by until needed. Respond only when all others fail. That day had come. Its sensors pinged the coordinates embedded in the message. A planetary body. Orbital siege pattern. Distress verified. Civilian markers confirmed. Enemy presence. High council support. Absent. Response. Authorized. The ship rotated in space. Slow at first. Deliberate. Like something ancient remembering how to move. Its drives powered up. Not clean. Not smooth, but powerful. And as it aligned its course, the final name in its logs illuminated across its main display. Revenant. It hadn't spoken that name in decades, but it knew what it meant. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't pride. This was obligation, not to a nation, not to a command, but to the people left behind, the ones no one else would save. And as the ship's jump engines reached capacity, a single log entry updated. Signal received, Lorne's reach, response initiated. Then without ceremony the Revenant vanished, folded space. No flash, no arc, just gone. On Lorne's reach the snow still fell. The defenders waited behind broken barricades and silent comms. No one knew what was coming, because no one believed in the old stories anymore. But in the silence between the next attack run, in the pause between systems falling and shields collapsing, something entered the void. Not a fleet, not a savior, a shape, a shadow. And this time, it wasn't a rumor. The battle for Lorne's Reach was nearly over. The colony's defensive grid had failed. The outer shelters were gone. The last 2 combat drones had gone silent hours earlier, their batteries drained or their cores slagged by orbital fire. Above, the planet enemy ships moved in perfect formation. Not fast, not reckless, just patient. They knew victory was inevitable. The only question was how clean it would be. Commanders rotated shifts. Weapons were calibrated for precision strikes. A final assault plan was prepared. Nothing unexpected. Nothing to fear. Then, something changed. It wasn't a flare or a warning. Signal. No jump gate burst open. No energy ripple triggered long-range alerts. There was just a shadow. A massive one. Too big. Too close. One moment, space above Lorne's reach was empty. The next, it wasn't. A shape hung in orbit. Black, silent. Wrong. It didn't match any known registry. No transponder. No ID tag. No recognized hull class. Just there. Like it had always been there, and the galaxy had only now remembered to see it. The enemy fleet scanned it instantly. Still, nothing. Not a signal. Not a movement. Not even a heat signature. But the presence was unmistakable. Some ships adjusted formation. Others trained weapons. One captain, older than most, stared at the silhouette and felt something cold slip into his chest. He'd heard about ships like this. Long ago. Before promotions. Before uniforms. When he was just a junior comms officer aboard a Terran Alliance frigate that no longer existed. The story had come from a dying pilot, pulled from the wreckage of a frontier ambush. He had whispered just one word before he went still. Revenant. The captain never forgot it. And now, staring out at the thing hanging above Lorne's reach, he knew. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a test. It was real. A long-range scan, finally, returned a single reading. Mass. Too much mass for its size. It was dense, reinforced. A hull made of something stronger than composite alloys, something older than modern material science. The ship hadn't come to warn them. It hadn't come to talk. It had come to end something. Then, at last, it moved. No thrusters. No elegant burn of energy. It glided, like gravity bent to accommodate it, like inertia had forgotten it. And the enemy fleet hesitated. Weapons powered up. Commands were shouted. Missiles launched. The Revenant didn't fire. Not yet. It simply turned. Not toward the enemy. Toward the colony. Its massive hull passed between the attackers and the surface, casting the world below. In partial eclipse. It didn't shield the colony. It dared the fleet to shoot through it. The message was clear. This was not negotiation. This was not defense by protocol. This was a statement. If you want them, you go through me. And that's when it began. The enemy fired. Hundreds of coordinated blasts from ships built by the most powerful fleets in the quadrant. The Revenant responded, not with shields, not with countermeasures, but with silence. And then, fire. The first volley lit up the sky above Lorne's Reach. Dozens of plasma bolts, guided kinetic rounds, pulse beams designed to breach hardened bunkers from orbit. Everything the enemy had, fired in unison, with the precision of seasoned naval command. The target didn't dodge, it didn't raise shields, it didn't move. The Revenant took the fire straight on. For one long second, the colony below braced for impact, not from the enemy, but from debris. Surely no ship could survive that. Then, the light faded, and the Revenant was still there, unmarked, unmoving, untouched. Enemy sensors blinked in confusion. Energy readings warped. Impact analysis returned null. Their targeting systems began to fail, not from damage, but from contradiction. Nothing made sense. The hull hadn't deflected the fire, it had absorbed it, rewritten the incoming data, turned weaponry into static. Then the Revenant spoke, not in words, not in language. It acted. One arc of light, barely visible, reached out from beneath its shadowed flank. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a missile. It was something else. It didn't streak through space. It simply appeared at its destination, and the lead enemy command cruiser disappeared. No fireball, no debris, just silence. Then a second light. Another ship, gone. The remaining fleet scrambled. Formations collapsed. Communications jammed with orders in panic. But it was already too late. The Revenant moved now. Not fast, not erratic, just steady, like a glacier slicing through a sea of fire. Every time it turned, another enemy vessel vanished. Some tried to flee. Others tried blind jumps knowing they'd never survive, just hoping they wouldn't be next. The Revenant didn't chase. It didn't need to. Every calculation, every countermeasure, every movement had already been predicted. This was execution, and in under 6 minutes it was done. Above the colony, the sky cleared. The enemy was gone, not defeated, erased. The battlefield was silent. No council fleet had arrived. No backup had come. Just the one, the Revenant. And when it was over, it didn't wait for applause. It turned away. Quietly. No signal. No signature. No demand for thanks. And below, the people of Lorne's Reach watched as the black shadow began to recede, not into hyperspace, not into some majestic corridor of light, but into darkness, back into the void that had made it, back to silence. Because the Revenant had not come to be seen. It had come to answer, not a threat, not a challenge, a call. And now, it was moving on. In the hours that followed, the debris field above Lorne's Reach slowly drifted into the upper atmosphere and burned. The planet's comms remained spotty. Most of the relays had been destroyed, but one signal made it through, a raw, unencrypted file showing the Revenant's final strike. It spread quickly. Within days, it had passed through smugglers, traders, old Terran relays, and quiet corners of the galaxy where official channels didn't reach. No one denied it anymore. The Revenant was real, but that only led to the question everyone was now asking. What is it? Some called it a ship. Others, a relic. A last resort AI. Construct from the forgotten days of Earth's final expansion, but the ones who knew the old codes, they knew better. The Revenant wasn't just a weapon. It was a reminder, a machine that had survived when entire fleets had crumbled, a construct that had watched the galaxy forget the people who built it, and kept listening anyway. Its hull was older than most ships still in service. Its tech couldn't be traced, no blueprints, no registry logs, no alliances, but it had a directive, buried deep. One line of code that every Terran engineer had whispered about, once, before Earth went silent. If all else fails and respond, that was the command. Not to win wars, not to defend governments, but to respond. To the forgotten, to the outnumbered, to the places like Lorne's Reach, where no one else came. The Revenant hadn't been designed to serve. It had been programmed to remember. And remembering was what made it dangerous. Because memory doesn't hesitate. Memory doesn't negotiate. Memory acts. And the Revenant had been waiting in silence for decades, waiting for the rest of the galaxy to prove it still needed a reason to exist, and now it had one. For the first time in generations, people began pulling up old files. Stories passed down through families, scrapbooks, encrypted drive cores pulled from derelict colonies. They found mentions, schematics, whispers of something called the Last Builder Protocol. A set of instructions never meant to be triggered, only activated if Earth was gone and no one else stepped forward. Instructions to construct a ship that could not be bribed, corrupted, or reasoned with. Not a tool, not a fleet, a judgment. The Revenant was not built to survive the war. It was built to outlive it, to return only when the people who had once begged for help were left to die alone, again, and now that it had answered once. The galaxy began to wonder, what happens if it answers again? Because there were other Lorne's Reaches out there, other colonies, other frontiers caught in conflicts no one would claim. And now, every time a system failed, every time a fleet didn't respond, people began watching the sky, waiting, hoping, fearing, because the Revenant hadn't come back to lead anyone. It hadn't come back to take revenge. It had come back because it had no choice. And now that it was moving again, no one knew how to stop it or if they should. The Revenant never landed. It never entered the colony's atmosphere, never demanded tribute, never claimed credit. It simply held its place in orbit until the last trace of enemy threat had vanished from local space. Then, without warning or announcement, it turned and left. But before it vanished into the dark, it sent a message, just one, not to the Council, not to military command, not to the opposing fleets. It sent it to a small secondary relay on the far side of Lorne's Reach, one that had been long considered non-functional, buried in a service tunnel, rusted, barely powered by a failing solar array. And yet it worked. The screen flickered to life. The message wasn't encrypted. It wasn't layered in advanced code. It didn't carry an official seal or digital watermark. It was audio. Clean. Unmistakable. A human voice. Old, weathered, calm. The kind of voice you hear in a quiet room after the storm has passed. And it spoke. Just a few lines. This is Revenant. Your distress was heard. You are not forgotten. We are still out here. Then silence. The message didn't repeat. It didn't end with a signature or source tag. The relay went dead afterward. Power overload. The signal burned it out. A whisper sent at the edge of extinction. But the words remained. Jaron Hollow, the old logistics officer who sent the original call, was the first to hear it. He stood in that crumbling tunnel alone, listening with his hand resting on the side of the machine. No smile, no tears, just a nod, as if to say, I knew you were real. He copied the message to a local drive, took it back to the others. They didn't make an announcement. There was no parade, no celebration, but the message spread anyway, passed from device to device, played quietly at night in shelter rooms, whispered to children born beneath the glow of emergency lighting. You are not forgotten. For the people of Lorne's Reach, it meant everything, not because it promised safety, not because it came from a hero, but because it was proof that someone, something, still cared. That even when the systems fail, when the fleets don't arrive, when the powers that be close their eyes, there is something left that listens, and will come. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because once, long ago, someone made a promise and built a ship to keep it. It started slowly, just a voice recording, 4 lines spoken in a tired human voice. "This is Revenant. Your distress was heard. You are not forgotten. We are still out here. No proof, no holovids, just sound." But that was all it took. The story of Lorne's Reach spread like a spark across dry grass, first through trader networks, then through independent colonies, then through old Terran archives, dusty relay chains and half-buried servers forgotten by modern fleets. Everywhere the message went, it was met with the same reaction. A pause, a quiet intake of breath, and the same whispered reply: "It's real." For years, the Revenant had been a rumor, a campfire story, the name you said when you were out of options. Not because you believed it would come, but because no one else would. Now it was something more, not just real, present. And that changed everything. Governments scrambled to contain the narrative. The Council labeled the ship an unauthorized combat AI platform. They issued alerts. They formed committees. They began tracing back old Terran projects, searching for anything that could explain how such a vessel had been built, hidden, and reactivated without their knowledge. They found nothing, because the Revenant hadn't been built for them. It hadn't been designed to fit inside anyone's command chain or doctrine. It was created for one reason only: to respond when no one else would. And now, the galaxy knew that it was still responding. That terrified some. Commanders began changing tactics. Raiders grew nervous. Fleet captains looked twice at their engagement orders. Because the next time someone ignored a distress call, there was a chance the Revenant might show up, and the Revenant didn't negotiate, didn't ask who was right, didn't wait for permission, it just acted. That was all. But for the people who lived on the edge of space, the ones who always waited too long for help that never came, the effect was different. It gave them hope. Not of safety, not of power, just presence. The knowledge that something out there still remembered them, still listened, still cared, even if no one else did. One by one, colonies began repairing old signal equipment. Stations long written off as abandoned began transmitting again, not to the Council, but to old Terran. Emergency relays just in case. And people started telling the story. They told it in quiet tones, over simple meals, to children, to friends, to strangers waiting for resupply. They told how the Revenant came when no one else did, not because it was called, but because it was needed. They didn't call it a warship anymore. They called it something else. The last answer. Because it didn't start wars. It ended them. Not with flags, not with declarations, with presence, with fire, with silence, and with a message carved into the stars themselves. You are not forgotten.